computer.
Yep, that's fine. Right, so I'll just record an intro. Hi everyone, so in this video we're going to be joined by a friend and colleague of mine, Fiorella Martin, and this is going to be all about why I can't always help everyone with every kind of driving problem. So first of all, hello to Fiorella.
Hello, Paul.
Yep.
And hello, everyone.
So what we're going to do is going to run through a presentation. She's going to give you a presentation which will explain quite a lot of detail about why it is you need her help. And as we go through, I'll be asking questions after some of the slides, just as you might be asking questions as you're watching. So with that said, it's over to you. Anytime you want to.
Okay, I'll just start sharing my screen, and I will go to wherever my is.
That's it.
Okay, so I'm sharing my screen now.
Yeah, I can see it. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm just going to read through it because that's probably the best way to, and in fact, I'm going to do a slideshow. So what is attachment trauma and why the therapy is 26 weeks? Childhood attachment trauma happens as a result of traumatic, neglectful, or harmful events or a series of events around adult caregivers from the age of 0 to 18. The brain is being formed and programmed during the first 2 to 3 years of life. The identity, beliefs, sense of safety are formed during the first few years of life based on the experiences the brain is having and the caregiving or the lack thereof around the child. The brain of a child who has experienced attachment trauma is set up for danger, for which it cannot defend itself, as the brain of a child. The child grows up, has new experiences, then a series of events happens, which trigger the part of the brain that could not defend itself as a child. This usually happens as a trigger of panic, trauma situation. An accident in a vehicle or family, friends in accidents and fatally dying re-triggers the powerlessness, the helpless state of a child who cannot drive or ride on roads, bridges, motorways, etc. So why is it that some driving anxiety can be resolved in a few sessions in general terms, and those who have had childhood attachment trauma will not be able to get the same results unless they resolve the attachment trauma? The brain is...
One thing. Your screen isn't showing for me.
What?
Your screen isn't showing for me. I can just see your files, but I can't see the actual screen. I don't know if that is how it records.
What screen are we talking about?
If I look at the screen, all I can see is your files. I can see Word files, I can see your presentation, but I can't see the actual screen.
So you can't see each slide as I'm going through it?
I was just waiting for it to come up. I thought it was going to come up, but it's all I can see is your desktop.
Oh shit. Okay, stop share.
I didn't want you to get too far. I thought it might come up.
Oh, okay, so I'm going to stop this. So let's dive in. What is childhood attachment trauma and why the therapy for childhood attachment trauma is 26 weeks? Childhood attachment trauma happens as a result of traumatic, neglectful, or harmful events or a series of events around adults, caregivers from age 0 to 18 years old. The brain is being formed and programmed during the first 2 to 3 years of life, specifically the right part of the brain. The identity, beliefs, sense of safety are also formed during the first few years of life based on the experiences the brain is having and the caregiver or caregiving or the lack thereof around the child. The brain of a child who has experienced attachment trauma is set up for danger, hypervigilant, for which it cannot defend itself as the brain of a child.
So I've got one quick question for you.
Yes.
Now, I know what the answer is to this, but what I'd be thinking is, what's this got to do with driving anxiety?
So later on, the driving anxiety gets reassociated, and I explained that further towards the latter part of the presentation. That what actually happens is that driving anxiety gets is triggering there's similar circumstances that re-trigger the old part of the brain that has these experiences have been dormant and get reactivated because something happens in the environment that is similar enough to the previous events. So I'll cover that later in another slide. So the child grows up, has new experiences, then a series of events happen which trigger the part of the brain that could not defend itself as a child. This usually happens as a trigger of panic, trauma situation in the present, an accident in a vehicle or with family, friends in accidents, and fatally dying re-triggers the powerless, helpless state of a child, not the current adult, who cannot drive or ride or on roads, bridges, motorways.
Yep. So what you're saying is the reason I've got a problem now is because of all this stuff that happened as a kid.
Yeah, that's right.
In a simple form.
Yeah, in a simple form, yeah. It's just getting re-triggered. And there's actually specific things that the brain recognizes, which I'm going to cover later as part of this switching to the child brain from the adult brain.
Yep.
So why is it that some driving anxiety can be resolved in a few sessions in general terms, and those who have had childhood attachment trauma will not be able to get the same results unless they resolve the attachment trauma? The brain is different. Generally, people who have not had attachment trauma are more secure and their brain has not become hypervigilant at a young age. Now let's look at the reason for 26 weeks of therapy. Just like brain surgery without the knife, which is what I call it. I have clients on a call. I use that analogy because it's just like brain surgery without the knife. We're reprogramming just like a computer or upgrading from Windows 7 to Windows 11 operating system. The old brain needs to give way to the new brain, the upgraded brain, which is why it takes the period that it takes to resolve childhood attachment trauma. The new brain that needs to be programmed and set up is going to do so as a result of the principle of neuroplasticity. The new brain program needs to strengthen and become the default operating system. The body that has trapped and adapted the neurochemicals of the addiction to emotions such as fear, flight or fight, freeze responses, it needs to be detoxed and adapt to the new neurochemicals that are the feel-good chemicals.
So what is this neuroplasticity? What's that mean?
So neuroplasticity is how we learn things. When we learn any new skill, the brain actually creates new neural pathways, and those groups of neural pathways are going to store the information of the new skill. So the brain essentially is not static. It's not made of concrete. It is constantly creating and also weakening these neural pathways. And the neural pathways are sometimes very weak when it's a new learning. And the more someone learns, has more experiences, has new verifications of those experiences, then the whole neuropath structure, let's call it a program, is made all of these connections. And this can happen from the perspective of learning something new, or events with all the associated information of what made that event. For example, when someone learns to drive, they learn how to drive. As that becomes more experience, that more new experiences, and no longer someone drives, the stronger that set of skills, and trusting in those set of skills becomes very strong and reliable, and we tend to almost drive without thinking about it when it's become such a long-term skill, capacity, and experience about driving in every situation.
Yeah.
So the new brain program needs to strengthen and become the default operating system. The body that has strapped and adapted the neurochemicals of the addiction, fear, flight, or fight, freeze response needs to be detoxed, because what I haven't mentioned is that the body has something called neuropeptides, and we can actually get addicted to fear, to anxiety, to strong emotions, just like as if we're addicted to drugs. And essentially, the detox process is going to create just like coming off drugs, the body's going to resist it because it's addicted to those neurochemicals which come from those emotional states. And it will resist that. So we need to keep persevering to make sure it gets familiar with feeling good. The brain loves what is familiar, even if it is painful. It's what it's used to. The only way to allow the new brain to become familiar is to reinforce it every week for 26 weeks. I'll talk a bit more about the 26 weeks later. To release and weaken the old brain neural pathways into the past and keep the new brain as a secure identity in the present, in charge of choices and decisions, and secure in its capacity to trust in the abilities and skills learned and practice, for example, driving. So the opposite of anxiety is not relaxation or calm, which is why, as Paul's mentioned several times, just someone, therapist or audio saying relax or be calm isn't going to work, because the opposite to anxiety is actually trust. Trust in one's ability to make the right decisions in the right circumstances, and to feel safe in self, secure in the self, to manage in a logical, rational manner without the old brain going into panic mode. Who am I? As Paul's mentioned, my name is Fiorella Martin. I've been a therapist specialist in this area, childhood attachment trauma recovery for adults, for over 20 years. My clients come to me after they've tried everything else without results. I had to overcome a multiplicity of my own childhood attachment trauma, maltreatment, and abuse. So I understand what it takes to achieve being secure and safe in oneself. So why the 26 weeks program? This is a signature system that I designed, and it works because it's customized and supported by the neuroscience principles of remapping the brain, and also because I have created it based on what has worked for me and what it requires to shift that trauma brain. One of the missing pieces in the attachment trauma brain was the secure, safe, caring relationship. And part of how I help my clients is to provide, as a professional in my role, it is to really provide a model, a secure attachment style dynamic, which becomes part of the client's ability to become so within themselves.
So what does that mean when it says it's a signature system? What's that?
So the signature system is based on a combination of working, well, it's a signature system because nobody else has got this system. So that's the first part. The other part is that as I have created it, obviously nobody else has got it. And I've created it the way that it is because I know what works, when to use it, what combination of techniques are required at any point during that time, depending on what the client is presenting. And we're going to talk about the assessment part later on. The assessment is going to determine at what point, when, and how I use different techniques with an individual client. Does that answer the question for now?
Yep, that's fine, yeah.
Okay, good. So most therapists do not understand how to move around the trauma brain without reactivating it. Once my clients start to heal, their life transforms and changes to more enjoyment, satisfaction, sense of safety, trust, and control over their environment. So here I start to address some of the most common questions that have come up as to what's the difference between the work that I do over the 26 weeks with the signature system and clients who have had childhood attachment trauma or childhood trauma. And this comes as a result of what is termed the ACE score. The ACE score stands for Adverse Childhood Events. It is a list of 10 questions from age 0 to 18, and it was designed by neuroscientists. The aim of this test is to determine how much trauma injury was sustained in the brain before the age of 18. The level of trauma brain injury determines how easily a person is triggered or has flashbacks unrelated to the present. The way the brain has sustained not just one event, such as post-traumatic stress being possible, 5 events or more determine addictions or dependency to people, situations, and substances. The type of or types of events which can create a cluster of personality or coping mechanisms, including complex post-traumatic stress and anxiety trauma, easily activate in the body's nervous system. So the ACE score determines if the person's driving anxiety is recent and a one-time event, or if the event has reconnected to previous childhood trauma and now has locked it into adulthood and will not release it, as the deeper root cause needs to be addressed and resolved and neutralized, which takes much longer than 26 weeks. Sorry,
What would you say
it takes much longer, and it gets resolved within 26 weeks.
So what would you say is there such a thing as an average ACE score, or is it just different? Is there a good and a bad ACE score? Where's the kind of limit drawn?
So there is an interesting thing with ACE score that I've had people who've done an ACE score and have not actually had a conscious memory to note on the ACE score that that event actually happened to them. The way that they've internalized it has gone straight into the subconscious. It's almost out of their consciousness. And when I start working with them, I notice that this actual event happened, or this series of events actually happened, but they didn't mark it on the ACE score. So this is a bit of an issue, because sometimes people will put a number of things or hardly anything on an ACE score simply because they don't have a conscious awareness or even a sense that that actually happened to them. This is a safety mechanism of the brain that will hide from the conscious awareness something that has happened to them, so they won't remember and it won't affect their life. But it comes up later on in life when it gets triggered. And some of these can be resolved depending on what it is on the spectrum that these people have experienced. Obviously, some things are worse than others in terms of affecting them. Some things are repeated, actually accumulate and become complex post-traumatic stress. So it is different for different people. And I give my clients more than just the ACE score when we're doing the intake. There's other assessments as well. Often the information comes through on a strategy call. My strategy calls are quite long because I'm really wanting to identify what they haven't told me or marked on, the original booking form, or even say in this situation have come through you, Paul. So even though there's guidelines, there's also parts of the brain that will hide information so that it's not readily available.
Yeah, because I've had people come to me who have scored 0, and then 1 or 2 sessions in, there's been some huge event come up. And like you say, it's not always possible to identify that at the beginning. Whatever you do, it might just be hidden.
Yes.
It can come up later.
Yeah, and the brain wants to hide it because it's trying to keep the person's functioning in normal life.
Yeah, that's good.
Okay. So the next common question is, why can't you just help me get over the driving anxiety without working on everything else? Just as we've said before, driving anxiety is not the problem. There are many people who have had a couple of events in adulthood and can even be phobic about driving, and these can be resolved quickly if there are no roots to these events to the past. I've had situations where someone hadn't been able to drive for 5 years, and this was many years ago before I met you, Paul, and she'd gone to psychologists, psychiatrists, doctors. Nobody could figure out what was going on. But what had happened was, as a series of questions revealed, that there was 2 accidents that happened to her partner, and she was in an accident herself 5 years prior. I actually did a very quick 20-minute phobic technique, and the next week it was all gone. She was able to drive normally, and she had a lot of symptoms. Basically, She couldn't go to appointments driving herself because she would physically start to feel nauseous and throw up if she thought she had to get in the car. So this is what I mean by the roots were nowhere near. There was no roots to this. This was a very, adult situation, and it was able to get resolved.
So what would you say to somebody who might say, I just want to get rid of the driving, I don't want to go back over all this childhood stuff?
They can say that they want to. That doesn't change what the real situation is. It's the same as saying, okay, well, someone's got skin cancer, but they don't want to deal with it, and then the skin cancer gets bigger and bigger and bigger. It's not going to go away on its own. You need to remove it so that it doesn't do any more damage. I don't know if that's the right analogy, but essentially you can be in denial if you want. The fact is that if you could resolve it yourself, you would. If you could have just gone back to drive, you would have. The fact that it hasn't happened for you, it means that there's something else there that we need to investigate and resolve.
Just touching on that and what you said on the last point, I've had people say to me, but I had a really happy childhood, nothing bad ever happened, my parents loved me, it was all great. So how can this be true? That's what you're saying in the last point about the man I realised.
Yeah, some people have an impression that they had a happy childhood, and I've even had clients that have said that and not ticked any questions in the ACE test, and then the thing that was actually a problem was before they were even 2 years old, because the brain, the right part of the brain is getting formed in the first 2 years of life, and until 3 years old they cannot have memory that has been imprinted on the brain in those first forming years. So they may not have a recollection of anything that happened then. And I had one particular client that I worked with, and her was really from birth. She went back to a scene that in her metaphoric brain was showing that there wasn't just one baby of her, there was two. One actually was very angry and hated the other and wanted to destroy the other. And so I had to use a very specific techniques to allow this person to no longer have this anxiety and self-destructiveness, because this was somehow embedded from birth. That answer the question?
Yeah.
So the person doesn't really know that this even happened or existed until we actually go and find it.
Yeah, this just shows how deep you can go, because again, I have people say to me, well, driving lessons fix this. You can see why a driving lesson is not going to fix this kind of issue.
Well, I currently have a client that one of the things that has come up, it wasn't even in this life, it was a previous life, right? So because I do need to access that information, and this may be sounding woo-woo, but I've helped clients with several issues, different types of issues, including having a trauma brain and anxiety. And when we went back, it went beyond birth. It was actually in a previous life. And there's a lot of, there's actually a psychologist who then decided to become a hypnotherapist, because he was not able to access the information. People weren't changing, and he had several situations, and he's written a book about it. I can't remember his name, but he was able to help clients resolve the problem because it was actually in a previous life.
Yep.
So
that's right.
Yeah. So the client may not know this consciously. All right, next question that we're going to answer is, can I just do it myself using free hypnosis tracks on YouTube? Well, good luck with that. No. When there are subconscious drivers, programs, and events, the subconscious has locked them in for safety precautions, and audios, videos, and many therapists who are not trained to be able to access these root causes will not be able to resolve it. Also, YouTube and audios are generalized, and each individual has very specific interpretations in the way they've stored the information or the events that are attached to their identity, such as feeling powerless, helpless, not good enough to overcome the current issue, because their trauma child brain is operating in the present, controlling thoughts, beliefs, behaviors, and actions. So the question that's come up in a way, but this is more specific. How can something that happened 30 years ago suddenly start making me anxious now? And I alluded to this earlier. So most people, we all have had an experience of a smell, sight, or sound that takes us back to pleasing, happy memories. These are called triggers, which the brain recognizes and connects to the past, brings them back to now. Unfortunately, the opposite, unpleasant memories can be triggered as well. If something in the current environment is similar enough to those past traumatic events, the past becomes now. The brain connects all the dots all the way back to there, and the whole trauma brain that was set up on high alert due to the past will cause the individual to be unable to separate now from the past using the rational, logical brain. The brain is set up for protection when it senses danger, even if it's not real. So what has anything from childhood got to do with driving a car? Driving a car is not the trigger in and of itself. You have the skills, abilities, experience, and knowing of everything to do with driving a car. The anxiety and panic attacks, fear of being trapped on the motorway with lots of traffic, fear of not being able to come off the motorway, not being able to control what others are doing, feeling unsafe, or even being phobic about getting into the car. That was the story I mentioned before, a true recovery story, is what has been triggered from past memories, events, and trauma, which has been lying dormant in the subconscious brain. Suddenly something triggers the brain. Someone on the road almost ran a red light, friends or family who are driving or on motorbike have, they've had accidents, and these painful losses are associated to past feelings of helplessness caused by similarities, light, sound, smells, temperature, sensations. The past is instantly connected with now, and the panic, anxiety, and phobias are associated to driving, even though they have nothing to do with driving.
So when you say people have the skills and all that to drive a car, I've had a few people who are so scared they haven't even got to the stage where they could learn, but it doesn't really matter if you're driving or not. It's because of this trauma from the past.
So I've had one of those who was still not driving and needed to get driving lessons, and the driving instructor actually said that she was too anxious, because the moment they got in the car, basically she would start getting so hyper that she was just unbelievably anxious, and they hadn't even done the driving lesson yet. So what happens is that there's something about and in that particular case, someone that was a family member had been in an accident. I think it was the father. And shortly after that, there had also been a death around an accident. And this had, again, stored in the person's brain and associated anything to do with driving a car to accidents and death. So in most cases, when we're dealing with someone who's already learned to drive, they already have these skills, ability, experience, and knowing of how to drive a car. But when they feel anxious, they have stopped trusting that this is actually true for them, that they can actually use their conscious, rational brain to trust these skills that they've learned. Unfortunately, it defaults to all the wrong things that could go, all the things that could go wrong, rather than knowing they have these skills and ability in a rational, logical way, able to manage and feel safe in most driving situations.
Yeah, that's fine.
So the other question is, can I fix this quickly? I need it done within the next few days. It can be fixed quickly if it has no attachment to trauma events in the past. Otherwise, based on assessment, possibly and even probably not. So will the person you refer to me do the same style of therapy as you, Paul? Yes and no. Some techniques will be similar and sometimes the same. How these techniques are used and when is different, as what is necessary to treat the client from the perspective that the old brain is injured and now has taken charge. So the old brain has taken charge and a new program has to be set up and installed. This is done through the principle of neuroplasticity and neurowiring. We are not just treating a current event, we're restoring a whole operating system and sense of self while disengaging the trauma brain, healing those connections so the positive resources are always available within, rather than being at the mercy of the environment, people, situations, events, or circumstances. This is why driving anxiety is different for different people and why driving can be the trigger to much bigger unresolved problems that have nothing to do with driving. So, thanks for watching, and I hope this helps, and I wish you all the best of life, love, and a secure person with peace of mind. I'm going to stop sharing now.
Yeah, we'll just finish before we do that. If you keep recording, we'll just record an end bit.
Okay.
So that's the end of your presentation. So what we're simply saying is to sum all that up, just for people who might be thinking this is a lot to take in, because it is a lot to take in. What we're saying is that the case you've got is simply too big for me to deal with, because it's bigger than I do, because I tend to work with people for up to 5 sessions-ish, roughly. And this is not something you're going to fix in 5 sessions. And it's not something I'm able to fix yet, because you've been doing this for like 20 years, which is longer than I've been doing it. So there are times where if you're wondering why can't you just help me, you can get over it and you can be helped, but it's just not in the not within the scope of what I do. Is that like a fair summary of what we're saying?
Yeah, definitely. The specific uniqueness of people who have had such a trauma brain is that the length of the program that I run allows for the reactivation of the brain, reactivating the trauma part. So for a while, which is why it needs the length of time, it'll flip back to the trauma brain. the new information, the trauma brain, the new information, it goes back and forth. And the process allows them to build a stronger and stronger sense of self, trusting in self, feeling safe and secure. And also the part that I mentioned before is that mostly these people don't feel secure in themselves, in their identity, in who they are. They don't trust themselves. Not only do they not trust other people, but they don't trust themselves in even the skills that they've known for a long time. They've lost a sense of connection with even their driving ability, and often there's sleeping problems. So there's quite a lot to deal with. Some of them also present, and I don't like to label this, but they present personality disorders and things that have to be navigated very clearly and carefully, because one of the things that I'm conscious of, and also what some therapists that I've given presentation to, and you've seen those presentations, Paul, is that they have not been trained to not re-traumatize and reassociate with the past. So some techniques that hypnotherapists use make them go back to the event without the therapist really realizing that the moment they do that, the client goes straight into the event and they reassociate immediately. And that process is going to just re-traumatize and strengthen the trauma brain. And I've worked with many clients who've been in that situation with therapists. So
yeah, and let's just say that that actually is how we met, because I had a client that happened to, and I didn't know about any of this, and that's how we got to know each other. And I should say as well, for anybody watching, that another way we know each other is because this is my therapist. So it's not just that I'm recommending some random person, but I'm actually going through your program myself, just so people know. So this is me kind of test driving the program, as it were, and it does work. It's not just a random person I've picked, from anywhere.
Yeah, no, we've got a very strong association, and there's a lot of trust in both of us. So the situation that we have is a very strong association based on trust. Otherwise, Paul wouldn't send me the clients.
No. So let's say people want to know more about you. How can they find out more about you?
So obviously, if they want to come direct to me, they can send me a booking via the website fiorella.martin.com. And from there, I will get an email and we'll set up a time zone appropriate strategy call. And I do assess people based on their ability to be committed to the full process. So it requires a time investment, a money investment, because it's a lot. It's a 6-month program. And if someone is not 100% committed, well, at least 8 out of 10, which is in, what I require, I probably won't take them as a client, because they may not be at a point where they're willing and ready to invest in finally resolving this.
Yeah. So is there anything else you want to add before we finish?
Yes, I am in Australia, so there is quite a big time difference between UK and say Europe. Canada is usually the biggest time issue, but I've set up my appointment time so that I can cover Europe and the UK within my working hours in Australia.
That's good. So we'll end the video there and get in touch if you need some help.
Oh, can I just add something here? I know that it's after you said that. A lot of times people ask me, what's my success rate? And this is no word of a lie. When people start the program, they will be 100% successful before the 26 weeks. and they get results every week along the way.
There's one more thing actually I've thought of we can add in, which is something I say is it's not just the driving that's getting fixed, because people might think 26 weeks and I'll just be able to drive a car. You're getting a lot more than that,
Yeah.
because it's going to change other things.
Yeah. So one of the things I say to people is when the internal architecture of the brain has been transformed, then everything that's possible on the outside becomes available, which before it was blocked off. Because when people have this sort of childhood attachment trauma, the tendency is that it limits their ability to have success in many areas of life. It can affect finances, it can affect relationships, it can affect what experiences people choose to have. And there's even, often a disconnect between enjoyment of life and being able to enjoy life. So there's a lot of things that it covers, and the fundamental structure of the work over the 26 weeks is that it will systematically address 12 categories of life. People never think about this, but it actually does affect, their attachment style, which is huge when we're looking at relationships. That's, anxious people will have a codependency scenario. Dismissive avoidance will have a problem with even wanting to have any kind of emotional connection with someone. And then there's fearful avoidance, which kind of fluctuate between one and the other. And by the end of the program, people will actually find themselves feeling more secure in themselves and secure in creating connections, as well as a sense of belonging where it involves other people.
Something I find quite funny is by the time people finish sessions, even with me, over maybe 5 sessions, they've actually forgotten that driving was the problem.
Yeah.
That's like, oh yeah, I can drive. It's everything else has kind of taken over and gone.
Yeah. Yeah. Relationships, work, income, everything just changes because we're really changing something fundamental, that the anxiety for driving was just the trigger. So
that's great. So we'll end it there.
All right then. Thank you. No, that's okay, because I could talk for hours. But thank you, Paul, for the opportunity to speak with you and present this side of things that, it's probably not as clear unless people have gone through this presentation.
That's good. Thanks for your time and your work, and get in touch with her. And
all right.
Yeah, that's all for now.
Thanks, Paul. Bye for now.